You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got a loaded show here today for another week of college football. We're going to start things off with Saturday scouting, where this week I'm going to be joined once again by my buddy Ben Fennell to break down what he saw at one of the most entertaining games of the college football weekend. He was at BYU versus USC, went to overtime. That was Ben's second overtime game in as many weeks, and we'll get some of his thoughts on some of the top players in that game, preview where he's headed this Saturday as well, and then we will get into Draft Buzz, where we're going to be joined once again by my friend Tony Pauline to break down some of the top things going on around the country right now. I know he's got some breaking news for us and a lot of fun matchups to watch across the nation this weekend. So we'll get into some of the names you need to know. And I would say it starts Friday night. USC taking on Utah. Ben just watched USC. They've got a huge matchup against the Utes. In my opinion, the Utah Utes, the best team in college football that not enough people talk about. On defense, they've got studs at all three levels. They've got some talented players on offense as well. So with that in mind, for Scouting Report this week, I'm going to break down Utah defensive end Bradley Anae, a player that really stood out to me this offseason preparing for his senior year. I'm excited to tell you what I think about Bradley Anae, and then we will finish things up with our draft mailbag, a question from you guys at home. But first, we will kick things off with Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
Well, excited to get going now for our Week 4 edition of the segment here, Saturday Scouting of the Journey to the Draft podcast. Ben, you're in mid-season form right now. I mean, you're coming in. You've got what? This is be your fourth road trip already. What were your thoughts of Provo, Utah? Your first time there?
Great atmosphere. Great culture out there. It's beautiful mountains behind the stadium out there in Mormon awesome country pictures, there. Yep. And BYU just hangs around, man. They're tough to put away. If you let them hang around the fourth quarter, they're going to surprise some teams. Double OT win against Tennessee, single OT win against USC.
4 games now, or 3. You guys have done 3 games, and each week
we had the Boise State comeback in the second half against Florida State. Yep. Double OT, single OT. Not sure what this week will hold. But.
Well, we'll see. I mean, it should be an interesting game. I mean, in terms of being a competitive matchup.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get to that game here in a little bit. I first want to get your thoughts on USC versus BYU. We're going to lead it off the same way we always do. Who gets the game ball in your mind?
We got to go Zach Wilson, sophomore quarterback. The Mormon Manziel has seemed to be taking off with his improvisational style of play.
Yep.
It's competitive, creative. He'll run with his legs, look to extend the play. Very mobile, a bunch of extended plays in the second half there that looked very Manziel-like. And then just putting his team on his back, getting the overtime win against USC.
Kid's a fun player to watch.
Yeah, no question. I don't know if he's a pro prospect. I don't think he's nearly as fast or athletic as a Johnny Manziel, but similar style of player and just a gamer, competitive, and he'll show you some exciting things in the game.
Yeah, clicking over, just kind of changing channels between games. I got over towards the end of your game, and you just kind of see, the kid's kind of got that sense about him in terms of that's the kind of player he'll be at the college level. I want to ask you first before we move on about some of the players we talked about last week, and then also some players that flashed you in this game. And we'll start with Jay Tufele, the defensive lineman from USC, a guy that you were very high on going into the week. I want to get what your impressions were seeing him live in person.
A little bit disappointed, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Not as explosive as I would expect. Watching him in pregame warm-ups, doesn't really have that hip snap that I really wanted to see from an interior defensive lineman. Stout player, strong player, active player. Still only a redshirt sophomore. He's only been on the field for about 14, 15 games in his career. Temper the expectations. He could still disrupt on the interior. He's not finishing a lot of plays, but he disrupts with that first step, his get off, and just being a stout athletic player, but has a lot of details and kind of refinement in his technique to work on.
Yeah, so texting with you back and forth when you're in the truck, one player that you said flashed you, and literally I got the text and looked up to the TV, and there he goes making a play. It was Kairos Tonga, the nose tackle for BYU, and there were a few BYU defenders that stood out to me.
Yeah, he was somebody that the Draft Network's Ben Solak actually asked me about if I had watched, and he flashed a little bit in the Tennessee game. Then I really focused on him in this game. This guy's got a really good first step. He's every bit of 320, 325, typical kind of Samoan, Polynesian nose tackle, like an Isaac Sopoaga, who was here for a couple years, or in San Francisco. But stout player, athletic player, really shocks some offensive linemen with his first step. Runs out of steam, though, chasing plays out to the number. Doesn't have a whole lot of range, but will disrupt anything between the tackles there and really hold his ground in the run game. Not really much of a pass rusher, but just his stout play will collapse the pocket from inside out.
And the corner that we had mentioned at the end of the show last week, that I took my first stab. You handed me the pronunciation, or without the pronunciation, just showed me the name. Took a stab at pronounce. You have a better sense of how to go through that name now.
I'm still going to let you introduce the player here. All right, I'm just the film guy.
I'm trying to push
see
the
BYU number 5 out there. Right? I'm not really worried about the names, but I think it's Diane Ganawalku.
That's pretty good.
Damn, I need Dave Pash or Greg McElroy here to help me out with the pronunciation guides. But I'll tell you what, I'll throw a truck and graphics department for a loop when they want to put in another number 5. Their running back is number 5, Tyson Williams.
Yep.
Then we see another number 5 in there in the backfield, and it's actually the corner. They have a goal line package where they'll put in about 4 defensive players.
Okay.
So Tonga's the fullback, they'll have a linebacker at tight end, another linebacker at tight end, and put the corner at running back.
Were they the Bears?
I don't know what was going on there, but he had a rushing touchdown earlier. They went for it on a 4th and 1, didn't get it later in the game, but a lot of it to sort out in the truck trying to figure out which number 5 is in the game.
Well, speaking of which, you mentioned Tyson Williams, and I only watched a little bit of the game. He's got some juice.
He does.
He's got some juice.
He reminds me a little bit of a TJ Yeldon. I don't know why.
Yeah,
Just off a first glance.
Yeah.
Not really that big 225-pound back, but runs a good power, good speed, good combination of willingness between the tackles, can bounce it outside and get an edge on you. He'll put his nose down and churn some extra yardage. Just a guy that might be a good kind of pro running back, maybe that third running back in a rotational group there. But yeah, nice player. I mean, he was a top recruit in North Carolina, transferred to South Carolina, so he's played in the SEC. Over at BYU as a grad transfer. He's a guy that might show up to the Senior Bowl and, show some guys he has some ability.
You also had a couple of linebackers written down as well, Fennell and Kaufusi for BYU.
Now listen, these guys are undersized. They're 210, 215 linebackers, but they are athletic. They move really well. They're tackling machines. They're tough. They each have flash plays in the pass game the past 2 weeks. Fanua had a pick last week against Tennessee, and also another tip pass in the red zone. The one that Juwan Jennings caught off the tip was his hand knocking the pass up. And then Kaufusi had another interception this week. They actually had another really nice interception by the other linebacker, a diving play against Keaton Slovis. But these guys are undersized, but they're willing and they're tough. They make the tackles. You wouldn't know that they're 215 by the way they play, but you definitely see the movement patterns and the skills and coverage, and you see the athleticism.
Yeah, BYU had one of my favorite linebackers in last year's class, and Sione Takitaki, who ended up being a mid-round pick. Was he the Browns?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think
kind of a hybrid player, and then they had Fred Warner the year before, so they seem to be producing some pretty productive players.
No question. All right, well, let's get back into some of your superlatives coming out of the game. Your one play takeaway, Ben, the play that you will always remember from this trip.
Well, just pick any one of these Michael Pittman catches, because it seemed like every play he showed you something that you could really take away from his abilities, his size, his frame, the strong hands, sideline awareness, putting himself between the corner and the ball, tracking ability, adjustments down the field. I feel like I saw 4 or 5 instances. We could pull out the touchdown at the end of the game. That was kind of an acrobatic play, to track it, adjust, find where he was on the field. They reviewed it. It was a touchdown. But there's a bunch of other plays where he just had good sideline awareness, dragging feet, really putting corners on his back on contested catches. Just a strong player. And I saw him in pregame warm-up, so we might as well get right to our off-the-bus guy because he's also my off-the-bus guy.
Looks the part, huh?
He looks every bit of 6'4". He's broad, he's tall, but he's kind of swift and fluid movement patterns. And they were doing some release drills where he had some suddenness, and he's a willing special teams player. He's a really well-rounded football player.
Yeah, he's a great blocker. I mean, obviously comes from a good gene pool. His dad was a longtime NFL running back, namely with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But a talented player. I like Michael Pittman on film. I like his play strength. I like his ball skills. He gets after as a blocker. It's like you said. I mean, he does a lot of the little things. Just a very well-rounded player.
Reminds me a little bit of our own Mac Hollins here with the Philadelphia Eagles. Similar stature receiver. Mac was an elite special teams player and had some really crafty releases, probably a little bit twitchier. He's probably a little bit bigger and stronger of a player. But I think that mid to late round player that's going to have to really earn his role through special teams and just being that 4th and 5th receiver. And the second receiver or 2 goes down, suddenly Mac Hollins is all over that field. So he's someone that might be able to sneak on the back end of somebody's roster in the NFL.
Well, anytime we're talking about a game with USC, we're always going to be talking about who are some of the diamonds coming up there. And USC always seems to have guys, particularly at the skill positions.
Yeah, and we're a couple years away from studying these guys as far as being NFL prospects, but just put on your radar, put it away down for later. Elijah Griffin, really good
with
looking.
An O.
Yeah, Elijah Griffin with an O, Olaijah. Elijah Griffin, he's 6 foot, 170 with arms that hang down to his knees.
Okay.
Really impressive looking kid. Tom Luganville thinks he's a first round type of talent in a year or two. Was one of the top recruits last year. He's only a sophomore. And then this USC receiving core.
No question.
Man, this team only has 4 senior starters out of the 22 players, and Christian Rector didn't play.
I feel like we've said that a lot about USC
So
the last couple of years.
3 senior starters out of 22 that I saw last weekend. This team is loaded and geared for a run in the next 2 to 3 years. It's probably not now. They need to figure out, is it Keaton Slovis? Is it JT Daniels? But, man, you look at these skilled players and the receivers on the outside, they are absolutely loaded with freshmen and sophomore receivers, whether it's Drake London, Amon St. Brown, Velvis Jones, John Jackson, Kyle Ford, 4- and 5-star receivers up and down the back end of that receiving group. That this team just looks young. They look exciting in the future. They have a lot of top prospects. If they just figure out that quarterback position, figure out the landscape of the coaching position as well. I know Clay Helton seems to be criticized every week, every decision. Doesn't Lynn Swan just stepped down from the athletic director? So a little bit of turbulence behind the scenes at USC, but they're still getting talent all across the country, up and down California. This team just looks really geared to make a competitive run in the next 2 to 3 seasons. It may not be this year.
Right.
You know, they're still young, but the experience and the on-field time for these young players will be invaluable.
Interesting. All right. Well, 2 weeks in a row for BYU. So interested to get some of your thoughts on a lot of their top players. Did Matt Bushman do anything in that game?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
They're really not
But
involving him too much in the
production,
offense. And, you know, it's just interesting to learn his father-in-law is also Chad Lewis,
Oh, there you
former
go.
Philadelphia
Nice.
Eagles tight end and former BYU tight end.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wish he was involved more in the offense. He's a good-looking player. He's just really not part of their offensive game planning. They told us they wanted to involve him more.
Yep.
Not sure where that game plan went, but he's still a nice player, athletic player. He's only a junior, so we'll see where it goes.
So I'm going to give you a couple of my takeaways before we go to where you're heading this weekend. My game ball, though, the game that I watched most, I would say the 2 games that I watched most were probably Temple versus Maryland, and Temple getting the upset there against the visiting Terps, and then Alabama versus South Carolina. My game ball, I'm going to go with Henry Ruggs, one of your favorite receivers in the country, 6 foot, 190 pounds. I don't know if you saw it, but I want to say it was 81-yard slant route that he took to the house. I mean, legit speed.
You know I love the acceleration through the catch point on the crossing patterns, the slants, the digs, the crossers. Man, he caught that thing and just was in a different gear than everybody else on the field.
They just it's unfair how much speed they've got and how much talent they've got in that receiving core. Whether you're talking Jerry Jeudy, Ruggs, Jalen Waddle, Smith had a long catch and run in this game. I mean, I tweeted this out Saturday. If you can't tackle in the secondary, you've got no shot against this receiving.
And the alarming thing is, this isn't against Chattanooga or the Citadel. This is South Carolina.
Right.
These are SEC corners. This is SEC speed. These are 5-star players in that secondary. And it made them look like they're in a completely different speed than everybody else. It's really impressive to watch Jerry Jeudy and the little phone booth moves he can make and making people miss, and it's just his suddenness, his craftiness. It's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, he had one really sick release off the line of scrimmage on one play. Jerry Jeudy,
he makes people miss right in front of him.
It's silly.
Yeah, it's the complete phone booth jukes. And I'm not sure I've ever seen a receiver that sudden and that deliberate and making people miss right in front of him. It's really crafty.
He's got a lot of Odell Beckham, the way he plays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. My one-play takeaway outside of that Ruggs one was actually on the South Carolina side. A player you and I have both seen up close, a player you and I have both studied, Javon Kinlaw, who reportedly has lost a little bit of weight. I want to say he was in the 320s last year. Apparently he's right around 300 right now.
It seems like he's been on a trajectory down from his weight. He came into South Carolina as kind of a big boy, butt, run-plugging guy, and he's kind of leaned up and gotten that kind of explosive first step to work in.
Dude, he had a sack of Tua where he knifed into the backfield, had to retrace a little bit. It wasn't like a real clean sack. It was a little bit late in the down, but you saw the quickness and the finish, the ability to finish one-on-one against Tua. And then he gets up and he celebrates, and he looks the part. And he always looks the part, but I think with his the dropped weight, you see that quickness and that burst. He's an impressive. I think he's going to be a top 50 pick. I really do. I think Kinlaw is going to go top 50.
And he's not squatty. He's tall. He's got a
long,
big torso.
Man.
He's long. He's a lot like kind of the way Marvin Wilson's built at Florida State, and just he's just a big mammoth of a human being. And I don't want to always keep going to Chris Jones as being kind of the long, upright trench players, but he really is. Or whether it's a more filled out Jerry Tillery from last year, it's that style of player that's just a huge human being in the trenches there. That's athletic. He's light on his feet. He's got the brute strength. I've really kept my eye on him the past 2 years and really wanted more from him.
Yep.
I thought he had all the tools, and he never really showed that elite kind of production or an elite play that I wanted to see out of a player like that. He was a highly touted recruit. They've always expected more of him on the field. It's just nice to see him put it all together, stay for his senior year. I was happy to see that.
No question. He's a guy that, we always talk about how, he could be standing straight up and scratch the back of his kneecap.
Right, yeah.
He could scratch on the opposite arm. So with his left leg, scratching with his right arm, he's just a freak show with his length. And then the other play, too, by the way. This wouldn't be my one play takeaway, but did you see the shot that David Pollack from ESPN put out of Raekwon Davis, the play that he made in that game?
I believe so. It was the one him scraping down the line there.
Oh, my gosh, man. For a guy that is that big and that strong, that powerful, to be that athletic, and then have that kind of range.
He's fun to watch, too.
No question. All right, let's get into your game this week, and you're kind of representing where you're going here.
We're heading out to Chicago, a little Big Ten matchup.
That's right,
here.
it's in Chicago. Yep. That's right.
Michigan State Spartans heading over to Northwestern to see Pat Fitzgerald and those Wildcats.
So
haven't done any Big Ten lately. It's been a while.
Yeah, early last year you had Ohio State, right?
Yep, and we also did the Arizona State-Michigan State game last year
in the desert.
They just had the rematch last week, kind of an eventful ending there. Michigan State had the game-tying field goal. 12 on the field. Bring it back, missed the field goal. Refs then admitted we actually missed an offsides on that play. So it'd be interesting to see how D'Antoni feels about this. Result.
I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but you mentioned Arizona State. I just watched that receiver that they've got, the senior that was a JUCO transfer.
Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, Ayuk. Yes.
Yeah, Ayuk.
This kid, dude, he has some Sammy Watkins, Cordero Patterson shades of the way he plays. He's physically, that kid's a stud.
He was stuck behind N'Keal Harry for a couple of years there, and they even had this kid Kyle Williams also as a number 2 receiver. I remember doing that game Arizona State last year. Also did their bowl game, and the coaching staff told us they were going to try to get him involved more and more. So he must have been doing something right in practice, or
he looks good.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about him, but he's a guy that I had written down, and just the coaching staff kind of said we need to get this guy involved. And anytime coaches say that, you kind of just write it down, make a note, and move on.
No, that kid's got a lot of juice. All right, let's get to this game now. So we'll start with Michigan State's defense because that's mainly what they're always known for, obviously. They've got some players on offense, but let's start with Michigan State's defense, and namely a guy who's been so productive for them this year, a guy you and I have both studied, and that's Kenny Willekes, the defensive end.
Yeah, he's a productive player. I think he's already up to 4 sacks this season in his first 3 games. Very productive player, guy that doesn't come off the field, played over 700 snaps last year, only 8 sacks last year. I think his impact is much greater than his production numbers would indicate, because he also had 23 quarterback hits. He had 39 hurries. He's a guy that's affecting the quarterback, rushing throws, getting hits on the quarterback, not necessarily having the high sack total, but a guy that impacts the pocket and is a strong player, a relentless player. It's a guy I think he really just makes his money by being relentless and not quitting and getting up and just being a well-rounded player.
That's his best trait.
I don't think he has flashy tools. I don't think he's an explosive player or an elite first step or an absolute pass rushing technician. But a guy who's just really strong and doesn't have to come off the field.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with everything that you said there. And watching Willekes, there are certainly some physical limitations if you're talking about his next level prospects. But the way that he plays, his play personality, the way he's constantly chasing after the football, that is his most redeeming quality.
Yeah, I might as well go through just a couple of the pros and cons I've written down. If you want a good tape, put on the Ohio State tape last year because Isaiah Prince got Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year, and Kenny Willekes put a whooping on him. He has a really swift inside move on his second step that catches a lot of tackles oversetting against him, which I'm not really sure why, because he doesn't win with a lot of speed. Had a really nice long arm sack last week. Sack fumble, called back for a personal foul. So he's producing, and it's not necessarily showing up in the stat sheet, but he's a guy that looks the part. He's got long torso, long arms, that big bubble butt, the high stance with his butt high, really fires off. Exceptional hand usage. He's got great balance and flexibility to kind of play on an angle and on a lean. Wins inside, wins outside, can win through you. So that's kind of how he wins, by being versatile and winning a couple different ways, but he's not exceptional or elite in any of those ways that he wins. It's more just keeping tackles off balance with the multitude of ways he can win. His best rush is that sharp inside move, likes the long arm, and likes to bully tight ends, but he doesn't really have any pop or jolt on contact, doesn't have those heavy hands, not a speed rusher, really doesn't have the bend or flexibility, doesn't have that elite athleticism. He's not really explosive enough to really bull rush NFL tackles. I'm not sure where he's going to win at the next level. Lacks the length. Some longer NFL tackles can really get into his pads a little bit sooner. More of a run defender than a pass rusher right now, but a guy you don't have to take off the field. So he has some production. He's got the TFLs in the run game. If you try to put a tight end over him, good luck.
Forget it. Well, let's talk about his teammate along the defensive line, a guy that we talked a little bit about last week, in Raekwon Williams, leading into that matchup against Cole Cabral in Arizona State.
Yeah, he's an interesting player. He's kind of a one-tech, three-tech hybrid right now, more of a run stopper than a QB hunter. Has good hands, locks out, sheds, finds the ball, that whole deal. Will line up at some nose tackle and sub-package odd fronts. Has an occasional rare snap at defensive end, but it doesn't happen too often. I just hate that he pops right up at the snap too many times.
That's one of the big issues.
Want to see a little bit more forward lean. He's not really a true leverage monster or hand fighter. Has shown some get off where he can get some knockbacks, but it's not consistent enough. He's got the range though. He's an athletic 6'2", just over 300 pounds.
Yep.
Good hustle, good effort, the urgency to the football you always like to see from an interior defensive lineman. Just not a dynamic pass rusher. Lacks the counter moves, lacks any twitch or hand usage. He's a limited athlete, doesn't really have the twitch or the explosiveness, stiff. I'm kind of close with their defensive line coach, Ron Burton. I said, give me the one thing you want him to work on this offseason, and it's getting after the quarterback, collapsing the pocket, having that drive, and kind of working on his bull rush with some more leverage and lean and get off. I had a couple players I wrote down that he reminded me of.
Okay.
Montravis Adams.
Okay, I could see that.
Coming out of Auburn.
Yeah.
Vincent Taylor, Oklahoma State, I believe. Willie Henry up at Michigan.
Okay.
So he's a guy I think can two-gap for you. Doesn't have a whole lot to offer in the pass game.
I think all three of those guys had issues with pad level, if I remember.
Exactly.
All the
guys
more
that
straight-up guys.
But all guys that played with really good effort.
Yep.
And flowed to the football, and I think that's what Raekwon Williams is.
Well, let's talk about a guy who's kind of seen, other than Willikis, is the other big kind of leader on that defense, and that's Joe Bocci, the longtime starter at middle linebacker there. Kind of your typical, try hard, super tough, Big Ten Mike Backer.
Yep, exactly. Big Ten tackling machine I've written down. He's a downhill, confident linebacker that wants to get into the box and shoot across the line of scrimmage. He's good at getting up and under blocks and things like that. He's just terrible in space. He's got no speed. He's got no length. He's got no athleticism. He's strong, but he can't run. I think he put up like 20 reps at 225 in high school, 400-pound bench.
Jeez.
He's a strong player. He's 6'1", 236. Reminds me a little bit of Mike Hull over at Penn State a couple years ago.
He last couple years in the league.
Yeah, he ended up having a nice little role with the Dolphins. He's one of these guys that just, you get him into camp, he's going to be tough to cut.
Right.
Because you're going to put him on the third string. He's going to be the captain of that defense. He's going to make 100 tackles in the preseason. He's going to be one of those guys that just, you're going to look at him and say, we really can't get rid of this guy.
Right.
But where is he going to contribute in the NFL on third down? Does he have enough speed and athleticism to contribute on special teams? I'm not really sure, but just a really good college linebacker in the Big Ten, fun to watch.
Take me through a couple of these Northwestern offensive linemen before we round out that side of the ball. Jared Thomas and Rashawn Slater.
Yeah, two guys that should be all over the Senior Bowl watch list, or Jared Thomas at least is. So he started at left tackle in 2017, paving the way for Justin Jackson, who ended up being the third all-time leading rusher in the Big Ten. Like, a very productive player. Moved over to center last year. 14 games started. He's center this year as well. Good-looking player in Jared Thomas. And this Rashawn Slater is a junior at left tackle, 6'3", 305. Started 26 straight games at right tackle, moving over to left tackle this year. Anytime a guy gets on the field as a true freshman, starts every game in the Big Ten. He's experienced. I just want to see where he kind of builds his resume and if he turns into a prospect. Not a guy I'm really highly touted on yet, but just someone that's been on the field, experienced, and let's see what he's put together.
And Northwestern, they've got the quarterback that transferred from Clemson, right?
Yep, Hunter Johnson, high recruit. He's about 6'2", 210, plays inside the pocket, outside the pocket, good athleticism, strong arm. Was down at the Manning Passing Academy for the last couple of years and really wowed some scouts behind the scenes there. But he was at Clemson, obviously behind Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant. Saw his way out to Northwestern. Haven't seen a whole lot of tape on him yet, but interested to see him throw.
Interesting. All right, well, let's get over to the other side of the ball. Not as many big name prospects to talk about, but I know Michigan State's got a couple receivers that you'll have your eye on.
Yeah, two guys really interesting. So there's a redshirt senior, Darrell Stewart. He's more of a slot player. He's 6 foot, 217. He's already got 8 catches of 20-plus yards in 2019. He only had 2 last year on 48 catches. So he's becoming Brian Lewerke's kind of go-to target on third down there. He's second in the Big Ten right now in catches and yards, trailing, obviously, Rondell Moore, as everyone's going to be trailing for the next couple of years. But nice little player there, so I'm interested to see if they can wrangle him in the Northwestern secondary. But the real upside player, I think, is Cody White. He's a junior. He's 6'3", 218. This guy has all the tools, the speed, the size, the route running, the athleticism. I think he's exactly what you want out of a kind of an ex-receiver in the NFL. He's a former Michigan Mr. Football. His dad's Sheldon White, who's actually the executive director player personnel for Michigan State. Worked in the front office of the Lions for 19 years, was a DB in the NFL for 6 years. So kind of a lineage that's been around the game for a little bit. But he's a guy, you just want to get the ball in his hands and some jet sweeps, some end arounds, some wide receiver screens. He's an excellent all-around athlete. So he's a guy with really strong hands, gets himself open, can win on all levels of the field. So someone I'm kind of interested to see if he could be their big play threat. I know Darrell Stewart's kind of taken that this year. But I think Cody White probably has a better upside.
Well, you haven't seen this guy live since week 2. Just your thoughts on Brian Lewerke overall.
I really haven't studied his tape yet, and I'm interested to see if he's going to clean up the accuracy. 2 Big Ten quarterbacks I'm really focused on this year, him and Nate Stanley at Iowa. 2 guys that seem destined to be Senior Bowl type of quarterbacks that you want to go, that can operate pro-style systems up there at Michigan State. You're not seeing a whole lot of quarterbacks play from under center anymore. And Michigan State, Brian Lewerke, they have a good run game, a pretty experienced offensive line. I just want to see if he could play within rhythm and be an accurate quarterback. I know 2 years ago, he really flashed some tools that last year everyone was watching this guy under a microscope to see, is this an NFL caliber prospect? And really kind of had some up and down play in 2018 and kind of left some people wanting more out of his play. I'm glad he came back for his senior year, and interested to see him play.
I think I had heard that he was playing through an injury last year. I think D'Antoni had said that at media days.
I'm still playing catch up a little bit on him in 2019. Obviously, they lost last week 10-7, so something's not going right in that offense right now. So we'll see.
All right, well, you told me before that when these 2 units are on the field, the Michigan State offense, Northwestern defense, the best player on the field might be Joe Gaziano, a guy that I know nothing about. So I'm excited to get your thoughts on the defensive lineman from Northwestern.
So he reminds me a lot of Zach Allen out of Boston College a couple years ago.
And you weren't a big Zach Allen guy, if I remember right.
He was fun to watch in college. He was a guy who played 3-tech edge. He was kind of a tweener, D-tackle.
So going back to last week's conversation.
He's carved out a little bit of a role for Arizona Cardinals.
Not hybrid, he's
as a sub rusher. Yeah, exactly.
Where's Gaziano? Is he hybrid or tweener?
Probably tweener right now.
All right. We'll see if it changes.
But he's 6'4", 275, fifth-year player. Was actually the number 1 player in Massachusetts coming out of high school. Is the Gatorade Player of the Year in Massachusetts. He's second among active college players in sacks right now.
Wow, I would never have guessed that.
He's got 22 career sacks, and that kind of made me scratch my head too. I think a lot of sack totals left to the NFL draft this past spring.
Right. Yep.
So there's a bit of a void there, but. Productive player, a guy that doesn't come off the field, can line up at 3-tech edge. He's a heavy player, but they'll zone drop him a ton. He'll get his hands on a lot of passes. Almost had a pick last year.
Was he like 280? You said?
Yeah, 6'4", 275. Dropped an interception against Notre Dame last year on a zone drop. If you're a late tackle, if you're late getting out of your stance, he will blast through your outside shoulder. He's one of those guys that's just a point A to B guy. Wants to get on a half man, lean on you, and he's heavy. He's strong. He's thick. He started over 25 games in the last 2 years. He's a power rusher. Can turn the corner, though. He had a long arm sack against Minnesota. I just keep writing down if you're late, it's over.
Interesting.
He's one of those guys that you can't recover on because of his brute strength. So we'll see how he handles. He gave that left tackle at Michigan State some trouble last year. I think it was Tyler Higbee.
Okay, yep.
Another guy that's on the Senior Bowl watch list, so interested to see that battle.
And then the other player for that Northwestern defense that's gotten a lot of buzz really over the last couple of years, going back to his redshirt freshman season, is the linebacker Patty Fisher.
Yeah, when I watched him in 2017, I said, man, we may have a poor man's Leighton Vander Esch here. And then last year, I think he was a little bit dinged up and didn't really flash like I expected him to, but he's 6'4", 245. He's a big linebacker, tackling machine, back-to-back 100-tackle seasons. 8 forced fumbles in his career. That tells me when he gets there, he's getting there with some attitude, some violence, some force. 5 pass breakups as well, so a guy that can contribute a little bit in the pass game. But 6'4", 245, that moves pretty well. So that's a big boy, and there's only so many linebackers out there to study in that mold, and that's kind of a Van Der Esch.
Well, for my matchup to watch for this season, or for this week, I should say, Friday night, USC, the team you just watched, taking on Utah, big Pac-12 matchup. And I said this earlier in the intro, if you had never watched Utah, this is a good opportunity. They're on national TV. They're the only game on. Go watch them take on USC. Obviously, a big brand name in college football. Utah's got one of the best defenses in the league or in the country. Stephen Carr, the running back from USC, is a talented player. Has flashed, throughout the course of his career, especially early on. Was dinged up last year. Has put on a little bit of weight to get a little bit bigger and stronger. I know he didn't really flash to you this past week against BYU, but watching Carr in that run game go against this front seven, they've got guys all up and down the line. We're going to talk about Bradley Anae here in a couple of segments. Francis Bernard, though, the linebacker, is a guy that I watched in the offseason, was their third backer, kind of the first guy off the bench for them this past year. And this guy's a playmaker. A transfer from BYU, actually, ironically, who you just saw. But this guy has got the ability to be a three-down backer at the next level. So Francis Bernard against Stephen Carr. Interesting game within the game on Friday.
I have a bit of a buyer beware across college football. To start the season, there's a lot of true freshmen slinging it around the yard all over the place, whether it's the Boise State kid, Keaton Slovis at USC, Jaden Daniels, Arizona State. There's always some weird opponents in those first couple weeks, and things are kind of sorting themselves out. Now we're getting into league play, and I think a lot of this magic with some of these true freshmen are about to dry up. And Keaton Slovis now has Utah coming to town. Utah's one of the tougher defenses.
All three levels, they've got studs.
Yep. Keaton Slovis looked pretty good week 2, coming in on spot duty for JT Daniels. Looked pretty good against Stanford and had a lot of true freshman moments last week. And I kind of fear for him this week against Utah, and a fear for a lot of these true freshman quarterbacks around the college football landscape as they're getting into conference play, and the comfortability is kind of ramping up on the other sides, and defenses are hitting their strides. I don't think it's going to be as magical as it's been.
Interesting. Well, something to keep an eye on. Well, Ben, excited to get your thoughts on this Big Ten matchup next week. Thanks for joining us once again here in Saturday Scouting. Well, great stuff from Ben, as always. And Ben does a great job working with me each and every week on our Eagle Eye in the Sky articles. He does all the drawings for all the shots that I put up on Twitter, so I'll voice him over. He'll do all the video. We'll mesh it together and post them out. That goes on the Eagle Eye in the Sky articles. And then also for Eagles Game Plan. And this week on Eagles Game Plan, we had Doug Peterson on the show. I did a breakdown of some of the top plays from the Eagles this past week. And then also looked ahead a little bit in the show to this weekend's matchup against the Detroit Lions. How can the Eagles beat Detroit, get back in the win column? We will break that down on the show later in the week. So make sure you keep an eye out for that on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, or on the Eagles YouTube channel. All right, let's get to our next segment now. Tony Pauline in Draft Buzz. Let's get to some breaking news.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Well, pleased to welcome back to the show here on Draft Buzz, none other than draft analyst from the Pro Football Network, my friend Tony Pauline. You can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline. Tony, we're going to start things off this segment just like we do every week. We're going to go through the grapevine. What is some of the hottest item that you're hearing now around the country when it comes to the NFL draft?
Well, a couple of people I spoke with over the weekend told me that they feel that right now Tristan Wirfs, the offensive tackle from Iowa, who many project as a early first-round pick, is actually leaning towards returning to school for his senior year at Iowa. The reason being is that, he's placing a priority on academics, wants to get his degree, and he just likes college.
Right.
Now, that remains to be seen if it holds true. There have been other guys who, at this point in time, say, I'm going to lean towards a return to college, who eventually entered the draft. But, when you look at Tristan Wirfs, how highly some people grade him, when we talk about the Walker Little injury, you're talking about two potential highly rated offensive tackles that have different issues, if you will, that may not enter the draft, which would really impact that position. So right now what I'm hearing is Tristan Wirfs. People have said they don't think he's going to enter the draft. Granted, it's only September, and these things can change. But the word is right now is that Tristan Wirfs is heavily leaning at this point in time to going back for a senior season at Iowa.
I think that opens up an interesting discussion, and you kind of touched on it, is just the offensive tackle position. I think a lot of people were really excited about the potential of this tackle class. And if you remove Tristan Wirfs, if you remove a Walker Little, you look at some guys and they have some question marks. You go out to Washington and where Adams is with his development. I haven't watched him yet this year. I'm not sure where he's at from a health standpoint, but I think there are some questions about some of the top tackles in this class. It'll be interesting just to see how it plays out out. Obviously, a lot of time here to go in the 2019 season and still some decisions to be made from some of these guys in the underclassmen ranks.
Yeah, decisions do have to be made, and that's that's the number one thing. But again, the fact that we're talking about this in September, these question marks, or I don't want to say question marks because that kind of puts it in bad light, but where these top-rated tackles may not enter the draft. Tristan Wirfs, because he likes college, God bless him, good for him. Walker Little's got a big decision to make, and again, you're talking about two prime candidates at an all-important position. We're not talking middle linebacker or safety. We're talking about offensive tackle. That would really impact the position significantly.
Well, just making room for my guy Tremaine Ankrum from Clemson to maybe get some more buzz as we get closer to the postseason. All right, well, let's move on to another position that some would say is pretty important. That's the quarterback position. I want to ask you about Jalen Hurts. And, we're 3 weeks in now to his career with the Oklahoma Sooners, the transfer from Alabama. Most college football fans are very aware of his story. But you look at Jalen Hurts and where he's at with his development. He's obviously tearing up defenses right now. I mean, he was lights out this past week against UCLA in a game that was never close. He's really been just unstoppable these 3 weeks playing for Lincoln Riley. Let me ask you this, because I know what your thoughts were on Jalen Hurts entering the season based off what you've been hearing from scouts and what you've heard from people around the country. I want to know, have the opinions changed on Hurts? Have you heard different buzz about him going into, we're going to start entering the midsection of conference play starts to begin here this week?
I mean, the only thing that's changed is, he's basically stepped up to bat. I mean, he's taken advantage of his opportunity. Now, he's tearing up defenses, but what defenses has he played? Houston, South Dakota, UCLA. I mean, and really, when you look at that Oklahoma schedule, I mean, the toughest defense they may play is maybe Texas, maybe Kansas State. There are not a lot of tough defenses on that schedule. But to his credit, he's taking advantage of his opportunity, and he's starting to develop as a passer. Now, is it just that Lincoln Riley system is a plug-and-play type of system where you get any sort of athletic quarterback is going to flourish in that system? Regardless, I mean, he's getting high grades for his leadership ability, for the fact that he hasn't really had a misstep. I think what's going to happen with Jalen Hurts is much of his draft stock and where he ends up in the draft will be dictated in the postseason at a game like the Senior Bowl, where he's basically playing in an NFL-type system, and he's asked or required to make NFL type of passes. But you know what? You can't knock the guy, because after his redshirt season in Alabama, there were reports people were saying that he's never going to be an NFL quarterback. And you know what? So far, so good, and more power to him.
Well, let me ask you this question now. We'll get into our stock watch. Whose stock has helped based off what they've done so far this season? Who have you seen that's maybe risen up in the minds of a lot of scouts around the country?
Well, off of last week, it's got to be Logan Sternberg, the big, massive, mauling offensive guard from Kentucky. Kentucky lost that game to Florida in heartbreaking fashion. Yep. But Sternberg, from start to finish, was basically just he's an immovable force. I mean, he is a guy who just mashes opponents. He plays with a nasty attitude. Once he gets his hands on opponents, it's game over. I mean, he drives them into the ground, and he plays through the whistle all 4 quarters. He's not the most nimble guy. He's not a guy you're going to use in motion or in his own blocking system, but he's got great size at 6'6.5", 320 pounds. Came into the season, I gave him a 4th round grade. Scouts had given him anywhere from a late 3rd to a 4th round grade, so they were already high on him. And he just seems to be getting better. There's no lapse in his game. There's no slack off in his game. And you just watch this guy. It's very easy to point him out, because whenever you're watching the Kentucky offense on the field, there are always defensive linemen that are being thrown to the ground or pancaked to the ground. And that's because of Logan Sternberg. So he's a guy who I think, if he continues to play the way he's going, and maybe he tests a little better than people expect at the combine, he's going to jump into the second day of the draft.
Tony, as 2019 season continues to move forward, I'm watching more and more of these guys, and some guys that maybe I haven't gotten eyes on before. And I wanted to ask you about a player that I watched recently over the weekend, and that's Arizona corner Jace Whitaker. Senior, missed most of last season due to an injury, so came back this year. Longtime starter out there for the Wildcats. Had 2 interceptions in the Week 0 game against Hawaii. Had another one in their second game of the year. So I look at this kid, and he is pretty interesting. I'm interested to get your thoughts on what you've heard from scouts about this kid, because he's a guy that I thought flashed, and I think he's got the ability to be an NFL player.
Yeah, and he had 2 pass breakups this weekend against Texas Tech, and the injury a year ago, I believe, was an arm injury. It wasn't a lower extremity injury, which may have raised some red flags at a cornerback position. He's got the size, he's got the skill. The big question about Whitaker is his speed, his 40 time.
Yep.
He's projected to be a guy that runs on the other side of 4.55. So he's a good player. The question is how fast is he? Because if he's a high 4.55 guy, 4.56, 4.59, or gosh forbid a 4.6 guy, going to drop like a rock because you're only going to be able to use him in limited schemes. Then again, if he continues to improve his play on the field and he runs faster than scouts expect, he could jump into the middle rounds. And, we talk about 40 times. Yeah, I mean, it's not all that important, say, for a defensive lineman or offensive lineman. It is very critical for a cornerback because you're going to be covering 20, 30, 40 yards on the field.
And what I like, too, is a lot of his reps. I'm not sure where he was in 2017 in terms of how they used him in that defense, but I know watching him, they've used him a lot inside. And so if he does not run well, let's say he is in the mid 4.5s, at his size, I want to say he's around 190 pounds, so a little bit on the lighter side. I think a lot of people may say, he's a nickel corner only. I like the fact that at least he's got proven experience playing both inside and outside. That will help him throughout the course of the process. All right, so for one player that is making plays out in the Pac-12, I want to get your thoughts now on a small school's prospect. So someone outside the Power 5 conferences, who's a name that we should be keeping an eye on moving forward?
Here's a 1AA guy who I'm sure that you and I will be seeing at the Shrine Game, if not maybe the Senior Bowl. James Robinson, the running back from Illinois State. 5'9.5", 219 pounds. As a junior in 2018, had 1,290 rushing yards, also rushed for 12 touchdowns. He's a guy who's got excellent size. He can grind it out on the inside, shows some terrific short area quickness. Last weekend against Eastern Illinois, he had 146 yards on 23 carries, 3 more touchdowns. He has a nose for the end zone, gets into the red zone, is able to pick up the short yardage as well. Needs to improve his pass catching. Doesn't show great pass catching hands, doesn't have big hands, but I think he's the type of guy that you can use as a situational runner at the next level, someone who can spell a starter on occasion. He's got some special teams ability in him. So keep the name of James Robinson, the running back of Illinois State, on your radar.
Well, Tony, let's fast forward now to some of the games for this week. We talked about Michigan State versus Northwestern earlier with Ben. Interesting to get a matchup, an individual matchup that you're excited to watch here in the games. An interesting slate of games here this weekend.
Yeah, a lot of games that I think are going to impact the national rankings, and then you've got some good conference games. I'm going to move into one of the conference games, Oregon against Stanford. And I like the Oregon, really some of the guys in their defensive back seven. Tony Dye, the linebacker who we've talked about before, Lamar Winston, the linebacker we've talked about before, and they have a safety by the name of Nathan Pickett against Stanford tight end Colby Parkinson, who we've talked about a couple times on this podcast. And we know one thing, Stanford always produces good tight ends for the next level. And there are a lot of people who feel that Colby Parkinson, if he continues to play the way he's playing and tests as he's expected to test, and I'm hearing low 4.6s, high 4.5s in the 40, Colby Parkinson could be the first tight end selected in the 2020 draft if he enters. Now, against Oregon, we've talked about Tony Dye, a guy who's a headhunter, a guy who's a terrific run defender, a guy who's excellent in pursuit. I have my questions about him in coverage. Lamont Winston, sort of the same. I think Winston's a bit underrated. Scouts grade him as a free agent. I have a 6th-round grade on him, but he's really better up the field. The safety, Nick Pickett, I have a 7th-round grade on him. He's only underclassman, decent size. It's going to be up to these guys, really, to stop Colby Parkinson because there's not much as far as the receiver position is concerned at Stanford. Parkinson is the number one option in that in the passing game for Stanford. He's a guy that's got a lot of ability. He's a terrific pass catcher. not a bad blocker, but they don't ask him to block that much because he's such a good pass catcher. He can get down the field. You want to see how Dye and Winston Jr. and even Nick Pickett of Oregon do against if they're able to stop Parkinson.
Yeah, if I remember right, and I don't have this in front of me in my notes, but if I remember right, Troy Dye made a really impressive pass breakup against Parkinson down the seam in last year's matchup. Dye's a very intriguing player to me. I haven't studied Winston or any of the other safeties, anybody else in that back seven for Oregon, but I have studied Dye, and he's built for today's NFL. I mean, his athleticism, his range, but also he's willing to come downhill and play against the run as well. He needs to get a little bit bigger and stronger, but this guy's been so productive. I believe the only player to have 100-plus tackles each season that's currently playing in the FBS level. So a very intriguing player, Troy Dye. Again, built for today's league in terms of his athleticism and his overall skill set. I'm going to go with one of the big matchups of the week, and that's Georgia against Notre Dame. Tony, we've talked about those two senior pass rushers for the Irish. You've got Julian Okwara on one side. You've got Khalid Kareem on the other. I think both those guys kind of complement each other very well. Kareem, more of the big, sturdy, strong base defensive end, if you will, while Okwara is more of an upfield rusher, can win high side. He's got an explosive first step. There's a lot of potential there as a pass rusher. Those two guys are going to get matched up throughout the course of the game with Andrew Thomas, the left tackle for the Bulldogs, who, we talked about Tristan Wirfs earlier. I would put Andrew Thomas right in that tier. I mean, he is that kind of offensive lineman in my mind to be one of the best in the country. This kid's got really good size and movement. He's got great pop on contact, but he also has pretty good feet as well. A very intriguing player that I'm excited to watch even more. Obviously, has done a great job not only protecting Jake Fromm and his blind side, but also opening up holes for DeAndre Swift and the rest of that running game for the Bulldogs. Andrew Thomas, definitely a name to keep an eye on here. Whether it's for 2020 or 2021, if he were to go back to school, he's a guy that's certainly one of the top prospects in the country. All right, Tony, let's get to our mock draft roundup, and we'll round out the segment as we do each and every week. We're going to go this time to CBSSports.com. Chris Trapasso put out his most recent mock draft, and he has the Eagles selecting 17th overall and selecting one A.J. Epinesa, the defensive end from Iowa. So we go with Tristan Wirfs' teammate. Let me ask this question. Number one, is there any way Epinesa makes it to 17? Do you think that the value is right there, or do you think that he goes earlier than that? And if so, where are you at on Epinesa? Do you feel like that would be a huge steal for the Eagles? I don't recall your thoughts on the talented defensive end.
I'm not as high on Epinesa as many are.
Interesting, okay.
I think people are overrating him. He's a very nice pass rusher. He's not an explosive,
No,
he's not an Aguara type of pass rusher.
Right, correct.
He's not fast off the edge. He relies on his teammates to make plays. I mean, this week, if you watch the game against Iowa State, I think he had one tackle and one quarterback hurry. What stood out to me in the Iowa State game and kind of confirmed in my thought that this guy is just not a great edge rusher, even though people think he is the last two plays of the game when Iowa State was trying to march down the field to get the ball in the field goal position. On passing downs, rather than have Epinesa rush the passer, they dropped him off the line into coverage. So if your head coach is not using you as a pass rusher and people are saying you're a great pass rusher, they're dropping you in the coverage, that tells me that Kirk Ferentz and the Iowa Hawkeye coaches say, hey, you know what? This guy may not be all that as far as an edge rusher.
Interesting.
I'm not saying he's not a good player. I don't think he's good. I'm not saying that he's definitely not going to be a first rounder or a top 42 pick. I've seen him in some instances mocked in the top 10 and that he's the best pass. I don't feel that way at all about Epinesa. I think he's very good, but I think he's a very good 4-3 defensive end. I don't think he's an extraordinary pass rusher. Maybe that'll change as the season goes on and I watch him more on film and he tests well. But right now, I just think he's overrated. I don't think I could see the Eagles taking him. I just don't think that, number one, the Eagles are going to be selecting 17. And number two, I really don't think Epinesa right now, in my opinion anyway, off the film from last year and what I've seen from this year, and I just mentioned what we saw last week against Iowa State, it's really worth the top 20 selection.
Yeah, Epinesa is an interesting one because I agree with you. He's not explosive off the ball, and I think when you compare him to, say, Chase Young, the other defensive end from the Big Ten that a lot of people are mocking in that range, in that top 10, top 15, with Young sometimes as high as the top 5, Young is by far the more superior athlete, but I think Epinesa is a much smarter pass rusher. He uses his hands very well. He's got a very well-defined plan of attack. He knows what he's doing as a pass rusher, whereas Young, still kind of being developed, but you see the ceiling and you see the athleticism, the movement, the explosive first step. So I think that's kind of the difference between those two. It'll be interesting to see how overall he's viewed if he does enter the draft, because he is another underclassman. But a very intriguing player. We'll see how the narrative continues to build around that guy. All right, well, Tony, appreciate the time here as always on Draft Buzz here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We will talk to you again next week, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so great stuff from Tony. You could follow him on Twitter just like I do, at Tony Pauline. And while you're at it, I'm at FDuffy3. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of, namely the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. This week, I was joined by Greg Cosell, once again, my buddy over at NFL Films, and we broke down what we saw from the film in the Eagles' loss to Atlanta. A lot of takeaways from that game, and then looking ahead to this weekend's matchup against the Detroit Lions, not a familiar foe for Eagles fans. So if you're looking to get a head up on who are the names to watch, who are the big themes to keep an eye on in that game, check out the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. And even if you're not an Eagles fan, we talk a lot about X's and O's. Obviously, we'll talk a lot about the Lions, so you can pick some things up about scheme and strategy and personnel in that podcast as well. All right, let's get to our next segment here. I told you we would break down Utah defensive end Bradlee Anae, one of my favorite senior defensive linemen in the country. Let's get to that now in Scouting Report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the Scouting Report.
All right, so let's get to my scouting report on Bradlee Anae, and I'm just literally going to read off my notes here. These are the notes that I took while watching, and this is a first-team all-conference player last year, all right? So out in the Pac-12, and actually going down to the Senior Bowl this past January, I caught up with Andre Dillard, the Eagles' first-round pick, talked with Andre in January in Mobile, and I said, who was the best player you faced last year? And he said, it's Bradlee Anae from Utah, and this kid, he brings it every single game. You watch him, really impressive player, and he comes from a very good athletic pedigree. His dad played at BYU. He was a two-time All-American. His uncle has been a long-time college coach. He's now the offensive coordinator down at Virginia, and his sister is actually an All-American volleyball player for the Utes. So this is a very athletic family. He's a good-looking kid, 6'4", 263, a little bit of an angular frame, but looks the part. 3-year starter at right defensive end for Morgan Scalley in that 4-3 scheme, but he lined up everywhere. He didn't just line up outside the tackle, because he'll slide inside the 3-tech. He'll line up way outside, has a 9 technique as well, 3-point stance, 4-point stance. He'll stand up at times, so he's got experience attacking offensive linemen from a variety of angles and techniques, and then also a pretty fluid athlete. He's got that initial quickness you look for getting out of his stance. He doesn't have outstanding flexibility turning the corner, but he can accelerate through contact when he's running the hoop, has the ability to kind of win quickly and then get to the quarterback. As a pass rusher, his go-to move is a pretty good long arm technique. Well, he'll use that inside arm and just kind of explode into the chest of the opposing offensive tackle. And he does a great job of pairing that long arm move with a number of other moves as well. I mean, I wrote down a hand swipe, a rip move, a swat. He'll counter that long arm with a decent spin move that he's still developing. So I like the idea that he's able to string multiple pass rush moves together. He's got a little bit of a developed plan of attack as a pass rusher, and you guys know how much I love that. He'll also work in a couple of other moves as well, a cross chop, a bull rush, a push pull, a double hand swipe. He's got a lot of tools in the toolbox, and he shows the ability to use them. Now, he's got to continue to improve on all of them, but the fact that he's got that long arm, that's his go-to, and a couple of compliments off that, that's a really good starting point for a college pass rusher. Against the run, a bit stronger than I thought based off his frame, but he attacks blocks with good technique. He sets a strong edge as a force player in the run game, so you can count on them there. Very disciplined player. He's always in his gap. He doesn't get too nosy. He's always where he needs to be. They even asked him to drop back and play in short zone coverage. He drove on some throws and made some plays in the flat as well. So this is a kid that's got a pretty good athletic skill set, a very well-rounded player, and I really loved his play personality. Really violent, competitive kid, good toughness, has a little bit of a swagger to him the way he plays with a really high motor, and he takes great angles in pursuit. I just love the way that he plays on film. Now, from a negative standpoint, I mentioned, doesn't have great flexibility, so he looks a little bit stiff when he's asked to turn the corner. He's not a consistently powerful guy who's going to always drive opponents backwards on contact as a bull rusher. So I like to see if he can get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, see if he can develop that power a little bit. Some people think you can, some people think you can't. So I'd like to see if he's able to do that at the next level. But this is a guy, if he can take the next step, I see a potential starter at defensive end of the NFL. He can win with crafty hand usage. He's got that high motor. I don't think he'll ever be a pure power rusher, but his play personality is really endearing, and I view him as a high floor player who at his floor can be a backup and a special teams player, but with his rush plan and his competitive nature, I think he can be a starter. I do like him most in a 3-4 scheme, but he's got that scheme versatility to be able to do a number of things. All right, before we get to draft mailbag, I want you to check out one segment we posted on PhiladelphiaEagles.com this week, and that's our old school All-22 segment. And if you're a film junkie, if you like learning more about the X's and O's, we're doing something that no one else does, and that's looking back in time before All-22 was available for fans and for media, and trying to look at some plays, some big plays in Eagles history, and looking at some fun players, and it's great, a really fun segment that I like doing each and every year. This week, we look back to the 1998 Eagles defense in a game against Detroit where you saw a number of blitz packages from the defensive coordinator, a future Hall of Famer, Emmett Thomas. So go check that out on the Eagles YouTube page or on PhiladelphiaEagles.com or the Eagles mobile app. All right, let's wrap this show up. Let's go to our draft mailbag. We've got one question from you at home.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
All right, so as always, I'm going to ask you, the best way to support the show is to go on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, and even leave us a comment. And I wanted to reward someone who left a comment on our Apple Podcast page, and that's from RJ Field. The question is, Fran, with all the buzz around 12 and 13 personnel, why do you think that teams in college and the NFL don't use more two-back sets? So we'll say 21 or 22 personnel with so much talent in the backfield and the ability now for many backs to catch the ball either out wide or from the backfield. Also, seems like it could be an added weapon in read option offenses. Thank you. And RJ, it's a great question, and I love talking about these philosophical debates when it comes to X's and O's and personnel and team building. I think when you're looking at 21 personnel, those two back sets, it could be 21, could be two back, no tight end, however you want to do it. When you've got two backs on the field, the key is that in order for those matchups to work, you've got to prove that you are both going to run and throw out of those looks. You look at Chicago, week one, everybody made a big deal about, they've got David Montgomery in the backfield and Tariq Cohen out of the slot. I forget exactly how many snaps it was they did that against Green Bay, but it was a good amount of snaps. They threw out of it every single time. And Green Bay, all they did was treat Tariq Cohen like a slot receiver. They stayed in their sub package. So it's not like they forced them into their base and made them respect the run threat. You have to be able to do that if you're going to go out of those two back sets. That's the beauty of it. That's why 12 personnel is a little bit more, you've got a little bit more ability to do that, because with two tight ends on the field, you're a little more likely to say, all right, we're going to line up tight and we're going to run the football. Whereas if you've got two backs on the field, let's say it's Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery, staying with that Chicago example, you need either Tariq Cohen to be the lead back and you need David Montgomery to be the fullback as a blocker, or you need to say, all right, we're going to leave Tariq Cohen in the slot and we're going to run the football with David Montgomery against a light box. You've got to be able to prove that you're able to do that as an offense with those two back sets. So either you do that, or defenses are just going to treat it like an extra receiver, except you don't have a receiver out wide. You've got a running back out wide who's not used to doing that. So that's kind of the debate you're going to have with yourself when you're building those personnel packages out. Really great question. And obviously, you're right. There are a lot of players now, those running backs with those versatile skill sets that could do so many different things. It will be a fun theme to watch, both in college and in the NFL, as more of those guys become more in vogue in the league. All right, well, that'll do it. A great show this week. Really appreciate all of you out there listening, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you listen. And again, best way to support the show, leave a comment, leave a rating on any of those subscription services. Best way to help promote the show for others to go and find it. Until then, we will see you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Enjoy another weekend of college football.